This is a suburb. You know them, there's a good chance you have an opinion about them. But what if I told you that places like these are in many ways contributing to the climate change catastrophe of our modern times? First, I think most people are familiar with the carbon footprint, or how much
greenhouse gas
each individual is directly responsible for. In fact, the EPA estimates that about 59% of all greenhouse gas emissions within the United States comes from us. Furthermore, the average carbon footprint in the US is 16 tons per year, and we need that number to drop below 2. So how on earth are we responsible for such high greenhouse gas emissions, and how are we supposed to get that number down? Well, having spent the past few weeks combing over some studies, I've come to the conclusion that this, or to a greater extent, low-density zoning is in many ways to blame. This being due to energy efficiency, zoning, and plain and simple, public transportation is just better for the planet. In fact, here are 55 people, enough to fill one Houston Metro articulated bus. All combined, this group of 55 produces about 9,730 grams of CO2 per mile. I had a hard time finding the exact numbers, but regardless, here is another group of 55. All combined, this group of individuals produces about 11,725 grams of CO2 per mile, or 20% more than if they all took the bus. Now, 20% is impressive, don't get me wrong, but if each of these people took light rail, they would produce about 4,241 grams of CO2 per mile, or 176% less than if they all drove. 176? Well, let's build some trains. But here's the tricky part. Places like these, suburbs, just aren't conducive to public transit. It's well established in urban planning circles that the lower the population density, the lower the transit ridership. Naturally, as ridership decreases, so too do profits. And if profits are low enough, well, why build transit to begin with? Now, I will say, many have and do argue that it isn't public transit's job to make money. I mean, the US government lost $129 billion building roads for cars in 2020. But the reality is, this is just how public transportation works within the United States. And within these confines, it just won't work in a city with low density. When we're talking about density, in many ways we're also talking about zoning. Zoning dictates what type of land uses and building heights, among many other factors, are allowed within different city areas. For instance, here's a zoning map of my city. Hi, Oregon City. Yay, density. Oh, that's a lot of tan, orange, and yellow. The first issue with low density is that as density decreases, distances increase. And this is pretty intuitive. For the sake of argument, let's say that every person in a hypothetical city is willing to walk a maximum of 1 mile. Over that distance, they'd rather drive. Now, suppose you have a population density of 1,000 per square mile and one grocery store within that mile. In that case, 1,000 people are within walking distance of the grocery store. Now, let's compare that to a density of 100 per square mile. In that case, 100 people are within walking distance of the grocery store, and another 900 people will probably drive to the store. And there's the issue with low density for public transit, at least one of the issues. To make a person even consider taking transit, a stop usually needs to be within walking distance. In reality, about a quarter to a half a mile. The second issue with zoning is the idea of separating land uses. Houses and shops go here, and it's illegal to do otherwise. Looking back at my example of low density, 900 people might be out of walking distance of this single grocery store, but I don't know, Safeway could build a store over here. That's what I mean by efficiency. In the high-density example, you only need one store to serve this entire population. But what if, under separated land use, grocery stores were only allowed here? Well, suddenly all the people here are no longer within walking distance, further exacerbating the issue we already had. One more issue with zoning. In addition to making public transportation unviable and forcing people into cars, low-density zoning is also really energy inefficient. That's because 100 separate houses will always be less efficient than if 100 people lived in one complex. So, Suburban zoning is inefficient in almost every way. And if that's the case, well, what's the alternative? These are the fourth main apartments, a mixed-use, transit-oriented development in Hillsboro, Oregon. It has 71 apartments and 9,350 square feet of retail space. The nearest light rail station is a 3-minute walk, and the closest bus station is a 1-minute walk. So, population density is a yes. I mean, it's an apartment complex. The zoning is perfect. The development includes shops and housing, and is further surrounded by several blocks of commercial use. And of course, transit is a yes, as it's 1/10 of a mile or less from both forms of Portland metro area's public transportation. After crunching some numbers, all of which you can fact-check down below, I suspect that this building prevents the production of about 49.7 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. All combined, this means that each resident's carbon footprint is about 6% less. Okay, look. 6% doesn't sound very impressive, especially when we need 15 times that number to curb climate change. What, everybody needs to move out into an apartment? Bear with me. 6% is not enough. And I like living in a house, but as I've demonstrated here, low-density zoning does in fact increase emissions. However, low density is low density, and 6% is the emissions reductions of just one single building. There are duplexes, there are fourplexes. Just imagine the carbon reductions we could get if most houses in a city were the single dwelling equivalent of places like 4th in Maine. Higher density, walkable, transit friendly. Now this is a city that could curb climate change. I'm Luke Peterson. Thank you for watching.